According to research studies, 39% of women who killed someone worked in the nursing or healthcare field. And today I'm going to talk about a female serial killer that falls within that statistic. I'm calling her the neonatal killer. Now stay tuned. Once again, it's Murder and Mayhem Monday. Welcome back. My name is Franklin James, the serial author. And today I want to take a trip across the pond, right? I want to go to the UK because I want to talk about a former British neonatal nurse who killed 7 infants and attempted to kill 7 others between June 2015 and June 2016. Now, last year, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I'm talking about Lucy Letby, the baby killer. Now, if you are familiar with this case, then you know that it is absolutely heartbreaking. And you're probably questioning how could someone do such a thing? And that's why I kind of want to take a peek inside of her psyche to kind of see what was going on, right? What made her commit those horrible crimes. But if you aren't too familiar with this case, I will do an overview of her life and the chain of events leading up to her arrest. Now let's get into it. So Lucy Letby was born on January 4th, 1990 in Herefordshire, England. She's the only child. Her parents are John Letby and Susan Letby. Now, according to a childhood friend, Lucy had a difficult birth herself, but we don't know what actually happened. So she may have been born premature or experienced some complication during or after she was born. But her friend did say she was quite poorly, which tells me as an infant, Lucy may have experienced some hardships that had an effect on her throughout her entire life. Now, according to that childhood friend, Lucy felt called to the neonatal profession. She felt called to help children who were born in similar circumstances, which speaks to her logic, which makes me think about the term hero complex, especially regarding her heinous crimes. But I'll get into that later in the video. Now, according to neighbors, young Lucy was a delight to her parents who doted on her and showed her constant love and attention. But was it all just too much for young Lucy? I mean, no one knows what happens behind closed doors in the privacy of someone's home. It may have all just been a facade. Now, I did discover that Lucy's parents felt very protective of her, which makes sense, because, of her traumatic start and her difficult birth. So they'd want to be protective of her. But were they overprotective? Now, that's the question. Now, academically, Lucy did well throughout school and was the first in her family to graduate with a BSc in child nursing from the University of Chester in 2011. So I'd say she falls into that average to above average intelligence category. Now, what I found interesting is that her parents took out an ad in the local paper just acknowledging her achievements, which I get, right? A parent, being proud of their kid and they want everybody to know about it. But then they also did it when she turned 21 years old as well. And you just don't see that a lot. So I question whether or not, Lucy felt embarrassed by her parents, right? If she felt smothered by them, if she felt like they were too controlling or too overbearing, and if their actions influenced her decision making. And I say that because once she graduated from college, she couldn't get away from home fast enough. She ends up moving across the country and ends up buying a home next to her employment, much to her parents' distress. In fact, it was noted that Lucy's parents hated that she didn't return home after graduating from college, and they made Lucy feel guilty about it. Now, coming from a psych background, I think her parents possessed a lot of fear and anxiety throughout Lucy's entire upbringing because of her difficult birth. So they'd want her close, because they were in constant fear of her well being. And as a result, they likely felt the need to intervene, control, and micromanage Lucy's life. I mean, her parents may have had difficult childhoods themselves and might have overcompensated by being overly involved, projecting their own unmet needs for validation and achievement on their daughter, seeking fulfillment through her success. But whatever it was, Lucy felt the need to get far away from home, right? So whatever she was experiencing, it definitely had an effect on her and it may have influenced her behavior. But I'll get into that later as well. Now, in 2012, she began working as a registered nurse in the neonatal unit at Countess of Chester Hospital. It was there she was responsible for caring for a wide range of babies requiring various levels of support. And from all accounts, people said Lucy appeared to really love her job. I mean, she even took part in a campaign to raise funds for the neonatal unit. But soon things began to happen and people started to take notice. It was reported that potential life threatening incidents took place on almost a third of her shifts during her training at a women's hospital in late 2012 and 2015. Not to mention, in 2012, Lucy was looking after a baby that collapsed and water was discovered in the baby's breathing tube, which was very suspicious. And then the following year, in 2013, Lucy, along with another nurse, set the infusion rate for a newborn's morphine at 10 times the correct amount, which isn't good. She was then reprimanded and called her suspension an over escalation. And I don't know if I would call it that. I mean, you're working with newborns. There's a level of caution there. Like, you have to be very careful. But then later she returned back to her role. Now, in 2015, she qualified to work with infants in the intensive care unit. And then in the following year, in 2016, she ends up giving antibiotics to an infant that wasn't prescribed them. And she called this action a minor error. And again, I don't know if I would call it that. But again, we see a pattern where she's minimizing her actions because in her mind, it's not a big deal. Even though she's caring for vulnerable, defenseless infants that are relying on her to stay alive, which could be considered proof of psychopathy. I mean, psychopaths like to dehumanize their victims and minimize their barbaric behavior. It's a common theme. Also in 2016, Lucy Letby was removed from clinical duty by management at the request from the lead doctor in the neonatal unit. This individual thought something was going on during Lucy's shifts, and there was an investigation into her conduct. Now, she was then transferred to the patient experience team and then later to the risk and patient safety office, where she worked until she was arrested in 2018. And she was arrested for injecting the babies with air, poisoning them with insulin, and assaulting them. Like I said before, heartbreaking. Now, one of the reasons why Lucy Letby was able to get away with murder for so long was because no one actually saw her harm babies. She was clever. She would fall under the organized category in regards to the FBI serial killer metrics, and she was careful when it came to the victims she selected. They weren't just chosen at random, but almost all her victims had other vulnerabilities, such as extreme prematurity or other inherited conditions, which gave her plausible deniability if they died. Now, I won't go into the full extent of her brutality because the things I've read, they just aren't for the faint of heart, but I will put a couple of links in the description so you guys can check that out for yourself. But like I said, the things that she did were just inconceivable, you know, just horrible. Now, during her trial, the prosecution claimed that Lucy Letby was out of control and was playing God, and the science would further prove their claims. But the defense argued that the science supporting the prosecution's case was weak, and there was no apparent motive for the crime. They said that Lucy's psychological profile did not match one of a serial killer. I don't know. I don't think that was the defense's best strategy. I think there are signs of mental illness. And I think when she was younger, she definitely experienced some form of emotional abuse, not to mention the complications that she experienced when she was an infant. I mean, these things may have had an effect on her brain chemistry and influenced her behavior for all we know. Not that I'm trying to justify her actions, but no one just wakes up one day and says, "Hey, I want to kill 7 infants, and then I want to kill 7 more." As far as playing God goes, I do feel like she enjoyed having control over her victims' lives. I don't think she really had too much control over her own life, especially growing up. So she projected that onto her victims. She was sadistic. These infants were defenseless, small, and vulnerable, much like she was at one point. And here she is rewriting the narrative by taking control of their fates because she didn't have much control of her own. But it makes me wonder whether it was less about playing God and more about being a hero, possessing a hero complex, yet not in the sense of needing recognition or praise. I think she targeted victims with underlying issues because at one point she was an infant who had underlying issues and complications. She saw herself in them. And due to her complications, her parents became overbearing and controlling. And like I said before, micromanaging every little aspect of her life, helicoptering, so to speak. Or at least that's how Lucy Letby may have felt. And as a result, she found her parents' behavior stressful and humiliating, probably embarrassing, and it had an effect on her. So much that she moved across the country to get away from them, which says a lot. It speaks volumes. So, in some twisted way, she may have felt like she was doing these infants a service by sparing them any future traumas or hardships they may endure, like she endured growing up, but at the same time projecting that anger she had toward her parents onto them. And yet, in her mind, she thought death was the better alternative, better than growing up in a situation similar to hers. She saw herself as a savior, right? Which is twisted and delusional. Again, I'm speculating. But of course, if this was the case and she did see herself as a savior, it would be on an unconscious level. She would have no idea that was the driving force for her behavior, you know, for her motive. Now, there was a note found in her home tucked inside a teddy bear diary that said, I killed them on purpose. I'm not good enough to care for them. I'm evil and I did this. The detective saw this as a confession, but Letby said it was the ramblings of a person in crisis. It was written while she was being investigated. But the note also mentions how she felt alone, suicidal, and angry. And it looks like it mentions something about how she doesn't deserve her parents and how the world would be better off without her. So she's clearly suffering from depression or other undiagnosed mental illnesses, and she used journaling as a way of coping with her feelings. I don't know about this one, guys. The defense claims there was no motive, but I think there was. And perhaps all this started because, maybe there was an incident where an infant died that was on her watch and she was devastated, but rationalized it in a way that benefited her, right? She may have rationalized their death as some sort of comfort because they no longer had to suffer, because they no longer had to live in a world where their parents were overbearing and too protective, you know, where they weren't hovering over their lives. But then her delusions began to spiral and she started taking matters into her own hands, liberating infants that she felt were in pain and suffering and sparing them from any future torment. I think for once in Lucy Letby's life, she was finally in control of something and she relished it. She enjoyed the thrill of it. And it wasn't until she got caught that she tried to rationalize it by saying, I wasn't able to care for the infants, which I think is bullshit. I think Lucy Letby definitely knew how to care for her patients and she knew exactly what she was doing. I mean, that's evident by her victim selection. She chose infants with underlying issues. It was premeditated, and she left mayhem in her wake. That's why I call her the neonatal killer. And I think she's a parent's worst nightmare. But I do want to thank you guys for tuning in and listening to my perspective about Lucy Letby. I know I talked about her upbringing, and I just wanted to give you guys some context, not justify her actions. You know, it takes a lot to cook up a serial killer. And I just kind of wanted to take a deep dive into her mind, into her mindset, and try to look at why she did, what she did, so to speak. But I do ask that you stab that like button and subscribe. Leave a comment and let me know what you guys think. Hit that bell for notifications, share this video out there, and you guys take care.